This weekend is the Hungarian GP, so to celebrate the race, I'm going to be teaching you how I mastered this fantastic Monaco without the walls S circuit. So coming down into turn 1, it's actually your highest speed on the track, and you're going to be approaching and braking just after the 100-meter board. There isn't really that much of a direct reference to be taking into this apex, so what I aim for is between the 100 and 50, so roughly imagine about 70 meters, and that'll be an ideal braking point. Or a more substantial reference marker is braking a few car lengths before this curbing starts on the left hand side, and that can be a good reference for you to be using. Turn 1 is a really unique corner overall, and the reason for that being is quite simply that you can take many different racing lines through turn 1 and still be successful with your lap time. The ideal line is coming in and getting to this apex and sweeping round in quite a traditional arc around the apex. Avoid touching the inside curbstone on this year's game, as that can unsettle the car quite a lot and hinder your traction. The other racing line that can be quite handy in terms of making a mistake and missing your braking reference marker by a slight amount is actually taking a wider apex to start with and then cutting back at the middle and going for a better switchback exit approach to turn 1. Like I say, ideally you will be looking to hit the traditional arc of the racing line around the first apex, but going slightly wider, cutting back and getting a fantastic exit out of turn 1 is also a great option to be using. The exit of turn 1 is quite great as well, quite fun. I really enjoy this exit phase of the corner, as you can use quite a lot of the exit curbstone and attack as much of the track as possible to open up the exit. It is a bit faster to not be using the exit curbing, but again, in light of making a slight mistake or misjudgment, getting on the power too soon, or having a slight snap of oversteer in the middle of the corner, you can run onto the exit curbstone and it won't punish you too much. So keep that in mind. Is option A, don't use the curb. Option B, you can use the curb in a slight mistake and it won't hinder your lap time overly too much. Choose the shortest distance running down into turn 2, and turn 2 is a really interesting dynamic corner. Again, you don't really have a braking reference marker, but again, much like turn 1, it is not absolutely required to hit the inside curbing. In fact, with the way that the corner is offset with the camber, it can also be advantageous to avoid the curbing and to run a longer distance around the outside of the corner. More on that soon, and I'll explain it in full detail in just a second for you. But coming into the corner, like I say, there isn't really a braking reference marker, but you're going to be braking around 60 meters before the corner. So of course you can see the 50-meter board on the left hand side of the screen, and you have the marshal post on the right hand side of the screen that is parallel with the 50-meter board. So with that being said, you can brake a few car lengths before the marshal board on the right hand side, and that can be a really handy and nice reference to be using at home as well. As I was talking about earlier, the corner is actually offset with the camera quite aggressively. You can see it in nose camera right now, but the track falls away from you as you get closer and closer to the outside white line, and the track raises in elevation as you get closer and closer to the curb. So ideally, you want to be running a shorter distance around the curb and to be hugging it as much as possible, but this can cause a car to be a bit unstable because of the off-camber nature. And a really handy racing line is to actually be a car width off the curbing and off the white line, and this is for where I find the most stability within the car and the most confidence to go around this corner as fast as possible. You'll actually see this happen in real Formula 1 as well, that cars that are set up in a slightly different parameter and have different advantages and disadvantages will be able to run closer to the inside curbing, or have to run wider and wider and wider as well to not be offset by the camber difference within the track. That being said, my favourite line is to be a car width off the apex here, but also a good racing line if you have a very stable car and you're not worried about snap oversteer, can be using as much of the curbing as possible and the white line on the inside to minimise the distance around the track. Turn 4 isn't really a corner in qualifying spec, and you're able to go flat out and try to use the inside curbing just to reduce the distance to the track. You're going to go flat out for this corner anyway, so you might as well make the distance a bit shorter and take an advantage because of that. Running up into what's turn 4 and the exit of sector 1, you're going to be seeing the black marker board on the top right hand side of your screen, and that's going to be quite good to use as a reference before turning into the fast sweeping left-hander. Because the curb is approaching at an angle, and you can see that the curb is not perfectly straight, something that is really good to be doing is approaching this corner and aiming for what is going to be that grandstand ahead of you. And you can see that green segment of the grandstand, also the truck with the TV stand, is directly ahead of you on the screen. And if you're heading directly towards that, that means your car will become parallel with the curb just before turning in to the fast left-hander, and I'm able to use up all of the track width before initiating the turn-in going into the apex. So, like I said, you have the blue truck, you have the grandstand up ahead as well. That could be good references for a corner that is very blind and difficult to get references before turning into the apex. Speaking of the apex, you're going to be approaching, and you do not want to be taking too much of the inside curbing. On previous years' games, you could really attack and throw your car over the inside curbing, but with the updated curbing model in the most recent update to the F124 game, you're not able to do this, and it's better, to be honest, to not have to attack the inside curbing, as they don't do this too much in real life. So what is ideal here is just to graze the inside curbing with 2 wheels on the inside of the red and white elements. In nose camera, you can see it, of course, exaggerates a lot more because you're lower down, so the environmental effects look bigger and they are more true to the representative that they actually are. When you're up in the TV camera, everything looks a bit more flat because you're looking down on it rather than looking at the ground level. So when you go into nose camera, you can actually see how aggressive this inside curbing actually is and how much it is bouncing the car when you're going over the inside of that. So it's definitely something to take into account and not overuse and over-abuse, because it can cost you lap time. On the exit, run all the way up to the white line and bring your car hard back over to the left, and you'll be going down into 4th gear if you have good confidence in the car. If you're struggling for oversteer, keep it in 5th gear, as that will make the car a bit more settled and you're able to go through the corner as smoothly as possible. Use up all the road on the inside and try and get as close to this curbing on the inside as possible, but do not touch it, as that will cause the car to have a lot of instability and snapping with oversteer. On the exit, I love these this like yellow curbing on the outside, because for me it's so fun to try and get the car pushing right up against the track limits as possible and to not run over it. It's a really nice reference to be following on the outside, and because it has a slight elevation on it, you can actually use it to try and push the car back onto the track and use it to sort of have like a guidance, you know. I can't remember the exact word, but when you have like the training wheels on the bike, it can be sort of like this, and you can have it as a guidance to sort of know where the outside of the car is relative to the track limits, because I know that if I have my outside tires on or near that yellow curb on the outside, it's going to be perfect with the track limits usage, and I don't have to spend my time looking at the inside tire, and I can focus my energy to looking at the outside curb instead. So for me, that's much better and quite enjoyable, to be honest. With that being said, then, use up all the outside curbing possible, and that will be opening up the track if you fly down into one of the most technical sections in the Formula 1 calendar. Just before the 50-meter board, or at the 50-meter board if you're feeling confident, break down into 3rd gear or 4th gear. I prefer to be going down into 3rd initially, because that can just help me stop the car a bit more efficiently. But again, you can roll 4th gear through these curbings, and that will be okay and adequate if you're looking for a bit more stability in the car as well. The second curbing, you want to be attacking as much as possible. It will unsettle the car, it will induce oversteer and instability in the car as well, but quite simply, the distance that you save by travelling a shorter amount over the corner and straightening the corner as much as possible is worth it for the instability within the car, at least in my opinion, and that's how I like to attack this complex of corners. Flying into the left-hander, you'll be in 5th gear and just lifting the throttle in time trial mode of the game, and you'll be using up as much curbing on the inside as possible, as although it looks quite aggressive, I'm going to go back actually because I'm going to highlight this a little bit more. Although the curbing looks quite aggressive and it looks quite big, and it is very big and aggressive, but The inside grey area of the curbing is actually completely smooth. As you can see right now, we're able to drive over it and it's completely smooth. So although it's elevated quite highly, you can use it really efficiently as it's not upsetting the balance of the car. Whereas you're just using the red and white part of the curb, you can see right now how much it jolts the suspension of the car and is really unsettling for the balance of the car. So that's why you can use a lot of the grey part of the curb, but not the red and white part of the curbstone. Through the right hander, you're just going to be, again, keep it in 5th gear. I like it because it helps the rotation and helps keep the minimum speed up. And then just lifting the throttle in time trial mode, and in qualifying and in the racing modes when tire temperature is enabled, you might want to do a dab with the brake. But ultimately, I like to keep it in 5th gear to keep the momentum and the stability high in the car. Flooring the throttle and using up as much road on the exit as possible, and then flying through the left-hander. And in time trial, this is completely flat out for this right-hander, but with tire temperatures and tire wear enabled in qualifying and the racing race situations alike, you might want to be lifting the throttle to keep stability in the car and not to overheat and overstress the rear tires. Avoid using too much of the inside curbing, as it is just quite big. It will bounce the car and you might find yourself in the outside wall. For something that is such a high-speed corner, it's better to not use the inside curbings anyway. Use up as much road on the exit as possible without getting your track invalidation here, but pull your car off the curbing quite quickly, as it is quite easy for the car to sort of scrape and bottom out over this curbing stone, but will not cause the car to really be unpredictable, but you might lose a few thousandths of a second just purely because your car is going to be scraping and causing friction over the floor, and that will be reducing your ability to accelerate out the corner as fast as possible. So use as much curbing as possible while coming out of the corner, and then get off the curbstone as fast as possible to avoid the car being bottomed out and scraping and causing unnecessary friction on the exit. Coming into the right hander, well, it's actually one of my favourite overtaking spots on this track, and you'll be braking just as the curbing is going to be starting on the left hand side, so about 65 meters before the apex. You'll be going down into 4th gear, and you have two options here really that are equally as fast. You can take a lot of the curbing stones and commit to the inside. This takes a lot of precision, takes a lot of focus to be able to get here consistently, but again, like I talked about earlier, the grey part of the curbstone is flat and smooth, so you're able to drive on it without the car being unsettled. As I can show you right now, the car is nice and smooth, but as soon as we go over the red and white part of the curbing, and we're going to just reverse over it as well to sort of exaggerate the point so you can see it in full fruition. When you're right over the red and white part of the curbing, you end up having a lot of instability in the car, and you can see the car's bouncing around right now, but when you go on the grey part of the curbing, it's completely smooth. So if you have the precision and the braking nailed, you can use the grey part of the curbing on the inside, but otherwise it's better, in my opinion, just to be aiming for about halfway on this inside curbing, and that allows me to do a quite short radius around the corner without the car being too unsettled, as quite simply the curbstone gets more aggressive the higher up on the curb that you go. As you can see here in nose camera, on the initial start to the curbing, it's not too aggressive, but then as you go higher and higher on the curbing, the divots in the curbing get bigger and bigger, and this can cause the car to be unsettled. On the exit of the corner, use up as much road as possible, and this is just purely because you can use so much road and the traction is available in this year's game. Again, you can use the AstroTurf, you can use the grey, but try to avoid accelerating on the red and white part of the curbing, as it is quite bouncy and will unsettle the car. Coming down into left-hander, the track goes downhill slightly before you start braking into the apex, so you can see it's massively off camber as you get into the initial entry phase of the corner, and it going downhill in your braking phase before going back uphill before the apex as well. This can cause the car to have quite a lot of strange effects as well, and it's quite easy to lock up the front left tyre going into this apex, and equally as easy to lose the rear going into this apex. Something that I highly recommend, because it's such a constant radius through the corner that if you hug the white line all the way through, it's going to be difficult to keep your minimum speed that high. So what I do suggest is braking to a point that you come to these black lines in the middle of the track, and then start to hook the apex back in quite a V-shaped formation, and this allows you to go slightly deeper on the entry to the corner and then pull it back in the middle, and you can have quite a straight line exit as possible to get back on the power and just graze this outside curbing. And now going into the final apex of the lap, bring your car's full fully to the left as possible, and now the rear of the car is so easy to unsettle going into this final corner. In GP mode, in tyre temps, when they're all turned on in the races, qualifying, even in time trial, the rear tyres are screaming for grip, they're overheating, they're just dying basically with the potential grip. So your tyres are going to be really vulnerable to performance at this point in time, so it's really critical to be smooth on the entry. You can delay your downshifts quite slightly, quite subtly, and this can help bring a bit more stability into the rear of the car, as if you're downshifting aggressively, it can cause spikes of locking, micro fractions of locking on the rear axle of the corner of the car, I should say, and this can cause instability. If you delay your downshift and do it quite slowly and progressively, it can help bring more progression and be a bit more stability within the car by doing that. So you can see quite a lot of Formula 1 drivers, they'll be quite slow on the downshift going into this apex to try and keep the rear stability as high as possible. But now, speaking of the middle and exit of the corner, try just to wait, because it'll be easy to pick up understeer, oversteer here. You're going to be waiting until that curbstone comes into vision on the exit, and then flooring the car and guiding yourself to the outside of the track and opening up DRS, and that will be your hot lap here in the Hungary. The setup that it can be quite advantageous and quite good within the F1 24 game is something like this. 50, 43, 100 seems to be very good on the on-throttle differential for this year's game so far, and then 20, 100, left, 36, 6, 21, 21, 22, 54, 154, and maximum tire pressure is very good on this year's game. I'm going to leave you with a full speed hot lap of this track with this car, with me driving in time trial mode. So thank you so much for watching. Grazie, ciao, ciao, and enjoy.